of the Take Your Shot podcast. Of course, as always, I am your wonderful host, Joshua Gitman. And oh my God, the NBA this week was absolute madness. I don't think I've seen any week like this in the NBA for a long, long time. A lot of things happened this week that I had to remove stuff that I wanted to talk about. Teams that I haven't really talked about in a while here on the Take a Shot podcast and had to scratch them because there was so much happening this week in the NBA. And it feels like each and every single day, each and every single week, as we get closer toward the trade deadline, it just gets crazier here in the NBA. And that's what I absolutely love. As I said, I have a huge show for you today. So we got to get right into it. So without further ado, let's give you the rundown of today's show. Today's rundown will include the Bucks firing Adrian Griffin, the doctor to the rescue, Scary Terry coming to the 305, Hornets cleaning house, what happens with Kyle Lowry, Wes Unseld Jr., see you later, Cavs making some noise, Joel Embiid makes history on the same day Kobe did. All-star starters reactions, who got snubbed, was the list right? And of course, to finish it off, we have the Take Your Shot top 5. But first, let's get right into the biggest news of this week. The Milwaukee Bucks have fired former head coach Adrian Griffin after 43 games into the season. And those 43 games, the Milwaukee Bucks were 30-13. They were second in the East. They're still second in the East. Even the one game after Adrian Griffin got fired, they played the Cavs. They won. But during Griffin's tenure, he was 30-13, which is still an amazing record. Second in the Eastern Conference. Currently, right now, Joe Punti has been named the interim head coach. We will get into who that next head coach will be for the Milwaukee Bucks in a little bit. But currently at this date, Joe Punti will be the interim head coach. He was the interim coach with the Milwaukee Bucks after Jason Kidd got fired in 2018. And he was the interim coach a little bit for the Atlanta Hawks last year in between the Nate McMillan firing before Quinn Snyder came in and took over the team. I mean, this is just absolutely shocking. My first reaction is like, wow, 43 games. 43 games, like a contending team who's doing really good fires their head coach only after 43 games. And then Milwaukee's like, "Oh, we're not going to scratch her for the rest of the year. We're just going to find another coach immediately," which is absolutely incredible that they all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, this pops up on Twitter, and I'm just going absolutely crazy because I have no idea what's going on. I mean, I'm for initial reaction, am I surprised the Bucks fired Adrian Griffin after what we've heard so far this season? No. Am I surprised it came so quickly? Absolutely. I am surprised that this firing came a little bit quickly initially, but as you think about it a little more, you want to be prepared for the postseason, and Milwaukee did not feel like with Adrian Griffin they were prepared for the postseason. So the quicker you fire that coach, the more time you can bring in a new guy or set up your interim and then get prepared for the playoff. That's more games with that new coach to prepare for the playoffs, more time to run sets with the new coach, more times to run new defenses, especially with Milwaukee, for that new head coach. So it does make sense after you think about it why they pulled the trigger so fast, even though they have an amazing record. And trust me, this firing was not about the 30-13 record. It was all about the defense. And I mean, you can blame the defense on Adrian Griffin, but at the end of the day, part of it is on the Milwaukee Bucks. But sometimes Adrian Griffin sets on defense. His game planning was not the best. But if you're going to blame a coach on defense, that is something I do not agree with because defense is more of a will and a skill rather than running an assigned defense by a coach. Most of defense is just the will, how hard you want it, how hard you want to compete on the defensive end. So there is some concern there with the Bucks even firing Adrian Griffin about the defense, but I think firing him, getting that new coach in will help the defensive schemes a lot. Obviously, during this firing, as we heard more details a little bit after it, Dame and Giannis, according to multiple reports, especially from Chris Haynes, who is friends with Damian Lillard, we've heard that Dame and Giannis did not like Adrian Griffin as the head coach, and they were not fans of him being the head coach. And Chris Haynes also reported that Adrian Griffin just pretty much lost the locker room. That's pretty much no surprise. We saw that he lost the locker room. I would say we started to really notice that something may be off with the Milwaukee Bucks at the start of that the in-season tournament knockout rounds, the semifinals in Las Vegas, where they had a lead to the Indiana Pacers. Everybody expected them to beat the Pacers. Everyone was like, "Oh, in the semifinals in Vegas, everybody was like, this is the Bucks tournament to lose," and they got upset by the Indiana Pacers in what was a amazing offensive display by the Milwaukee Bucks. But that defense was absolutely terrible. I know Indiana is playing at a historic offensive level, but for a championship contending team playing against an average team, a little bit of above average team now with Siakam in the Eastern Conference, that's just not really something that gives you a lot of hope in the postseason. So that's where probably most of the concern started. And reports said the GM, John Horst, walked into practices and just didn't like what he saw. So he just pulled the trigger. And it makes sense why he did. That defense is pretty much at a all-time low in this Giannis era for the Milwaukee Bucks. They allow the sixth most points per game. They come they force the least amount of turnovers in the NBA, and they allow the fourth most field goals in the NBA. So that defense has not been good. They're in the category on defense with teams like Washington, Detroit, Indiana, Charlotte, if in the Eastern Conference. And if you're Milwaukee, that is absolutely where you do not want to be. But as I said, this was a little bit of a tense scenario ever since training camp, actually, because remember, Terry Slots was supposed to be the associate head coach, not Joe Punti, who is obviously the current interim head coach. Terry Slots was there at training camp for the Milwaukee Bucks to be that lead assistant, and then all of a sudden he left. So that was a little bit concerning for the Milwaukee Bucks. And obviously, now that you reflect back onto it, you can see that immediately, like at the start of training camp, there must have been a major issue, not even just internally with the coaching staff, not even with the team itself. So that's a that was probably a little bit of a problem now looking back at it. And if you think about it, that Terry Slots loss, especially now looking back at it, that you did fire Adrian Griffin, that's a big loss because he could have stepped in as your interim head coach. Maybe you didn't need to hire the coach we're going to talk about in a few minutes, which is Doc Rivers. And obviously, he's familiar with Damian Lillard's game. He can probably incorporate Dame and Giannis, but the Portland Trailblazers defenses weren't really that impressive. But I mean, Terry Slots has been there. He is an experienced head coach. Obviously, he hasn't made the finals. He did make the conference finals with Portland in 2019, but you potentially didn't have to get Doc Rivers immediately. Could have seen how Terry Slots did the rest of the season and worked from there in the offseason instead of rushing to get the only head coach available. So that, if you look back on that now, that Terry Slots issue at training camp was also a big loss. So this whole season for Milwaukee, starting from that training camp scenario, has been an absolute disaster. But again, at the same time, some of it's on the players. Like this Milwaukee Bucks team potentially needs some trades. Maybe you go out there and trade Pat Connaughton for a potentially better defender. Like, I don't know who's out there that you can get if you're Milwaukee. And it's going to be tough, especially since you're a second apron team and you cannot get really a lot of players in the buyout market. That's going to be really tough for Milwaukee. So they're going to have to make a trade if they want to improve this roster. And it's not going to come easy because obviously they traded all their first round picks to Portland to get Damian Lillard. They traded other first round picks to New Orleans to get Drew Holiday, who they traded with more first round picks to get Damian Lillard. So pretty much Milwaukee's out of first round picks. I mean, the only thing you can throw in is a few seconds. So you're not really getting another major upgrade if you're Milwaukee. Maybe you work something around the edges, but I think somebody good for Milwaukee would be like a Dorian Finney-Smith potentially, or just another backup guard who can really help that team. Can't really think of any names right now. But it's not going to be easy when you only have second round picks because the Nets want a first, like for the Dorian Finney Smith example, the Nets want a first round pick. For the Royce O'Neal example, the Nets want a first round pick. So it's going to be really tough for Milwaukee to make a lot of moves. So this is just a really interesting scenario for Milwaukee. And some people are going to compare it to 2016 when David Blatt got fired from Cleveland. Tyronn Lue came in to the team and coached them to that championship in 2016. People think it's the same scenario. No, but it's different because Tyronn Lue was on that Cleveland staff with David Blatt. He came in as the interim coach for this Milwaukee Bucks, for that Cleveland Cavaliers team, knowing the players, being around the players for a majority of the season already, knowing most of the sets and stuff, maybe changing a few things here or there. But Tyronn Lue was familiar with that system at the current season. But this is completely different. You're bringing in a head coach that is completely new, that is coming in, that's not going to have his coaching staff. So it's going to be a little bit difficult of an adjustment. It may take a little bit of time for Milwaukee. They may start on a little bit of a rough patch, but hopefully it works out. And for that coach, Doc Rivers, we really hope it works out because Doc Rivers, especially in the past few years, has had experience in not performing well in the postseason. This honestly, not just the past few years, ever since 2008, ever since he won that championship with Boston, ever since then, he really hasn't gotten out of the second round of the postseason. He's blown 3-1 leads in the playoffs, and it's just really been a little bit iffy for Doc Rivers, especially going out in Philadelphia this past season when you were up 3-2 against Boston. You have it at home. You close out game at home. You blow that. Then you blow another game in Boston. You blow a 3-2 lead just like that. You're out of the playoffs in the second round. Once again, 3 straight years for the Philadelphia 76ers losing in the second round of the playoffs from 2021 when you had the 1 seed. You lost to Atlanta. Then 2022, you lost to Miami as the 4 seed, and now 2023 he lost to Boston as the number 3 seed. So it's been a little bit rough for Doc lately, and like we can go back even more. 2020, look at what happened with the Clippers. Blew a 3-1 lead to Denver. I mean, it's been a little bit of a concern here for Doc Rivers in the postseason, really strategizing against teams. But I mean, if you're Milwaukee, this is really the only option you have. I mean, some other options that I would have liked to see potentially be in that mix to be the head coach was Jeff Van Gundy, consultant with the Celtics. Kenny Atkinson, I would say, current assistant head coach for Golden State, could have been brought up there. Those were 2 other options that I would have liked to see potentially be the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, but Doc Rivers, probably the best option out there, who has been a recent head coach. So, I mean, if you really wanted to get a head coach instead of riding it with Punti the rest of the season, I mean, that's who you're going to get. He did sign a $40 million deal through 2027, I believe, Doc Rivers. So Milwaukee is committing to Doc Rivers. Milwaukee is committing to Doc as their head coach of the future. But as I said, it's going to be a tough adjustment going in for Doc Rivers. It's going to be a new system, not with the staff, even though I did hear that he is bringing David Jogger, former head coach of Memphis, Sacramento, who was an assistant with him for Philadelphia. He's going to bring him in with Milwaukee. So that gives him some familiarity, but it's going to be a little bit of a difficult challenge for Doc Rivers. This will probably be his hardest challenge of his career coming into a middle of a season. Even though Milwaukee's good, even though Milwaukee's got Giannis, Dame, 2 top 75 players of all time, coming in and making the adjustments that are needed for Milwaukee to get over the hump, especially with an Eastern Conference that is much improved from last year and a Milwaukee Bucks team that is very hungry after losing in the first round to the Miami Heat last year. So it's going to be a very tough job for Doc Rivers, and what does he have to do? He's got to make the Bucks play a lot harder. I believe he can do that, but if he cannot do that and it doesn't work out for the Bucks again, I feel like this will be Doc Rivers' last chance as a head coach. It will be the last chance for Doc Rivers to be a head coach of a serious contender, whether even in general, just a head coach at all, because of his recent playoff history. Doc Rivers has got to get out of the second round eventually. So that's going to be a question going in. Can he figure out the adjustments to get a very talented team, in my opinion, up there with Boston, over the hump, beating Boston, a team that you lost to last year when you coach the Philadelphia 76ers, and get them over that hump to win a championship, Giannis and Damian Lillard? That will be a tough job for Doc Rivers. Again, I don't expect initial success. It's going to be slow, but I think ultimately they they made the right choice by hiring a veteran coach. Obviously, if you are a contending team like the Milwaukee Bucks, you probably made a mistake by hiring a first-year coach. So by fixing your mistake now, hiring a coach who has won a championship, even though, as I've been repeatedly saying, has not had a lot of playoff success, he's the best you're going to get. So hopefully it works out for the Milwaukee Bucks. But moving on from the whole Milwaukee Bucks situation, we had another trade in the NBA this week, and this trade was to the Miami Heat. Terry Rozier has been traded to the Miami Heat. The trade included, as I said, Terry Rozier to the Miami Heat, Kyle Lowry, and a 2027 lottery protected first is going to Charlotte. If Miami does get that first round pick in 2027, it will be conveyed to a 2028 unprotected first round pick for Charlotte. So no matter what here, the Charlotte Hornets will be getting a first round pick in this trade. Potentially could be also a 2029 unprotected first. It depends on if Miami makes the playoffs next year, because they have another trade with Oklahoma City. Same scenario, 2025 lottery protected that converts to a 2026 unprotected. So you can't have you can't not have a 2026 and a 2028 first round pick. There's a scenario there where it could be a 2029, but enough with that stuff. At the end of the day, Terry Rozier basically traded for Kyle Lowry and a protected first round pick. Obviously, for Miami, this is a major upgrade for them, a major scoring upgrade compared to Kyle Lowry, who was only averaging 8 points and only scored 3 field goals in his last 5 games for the Miami Heat. You could tell that a change was going to be made here for the Miami Heat, as in Kyle Lowry's last 2 games with them, he was moved to the bench all of a sudden. So you could sense it. Kyle Lowry was getting a little bit frustrated that he was being moved to the bench. But why would he be moved to the bench in the first place? I mean, you could sort of tell there that this Kyle Lowry Miami Heat run was coming to an end. Obviously, they traded for him in the 2021 offseason for Dragic, Precious Achiuwa. And obviously now Achiuwa's on the Knicks. Dragic is out of the league, but Kyle Lowry did do good in that first season. He helped lead Miami to that first seed, made it to the conference finals. Then the next year, obviously, which was last season, 8th seed, had a little bit of a down year, one of his worst years of his career. But he did make a huge impact in the playoffs for Miami. So he was an impact, but this year has just been an absolute disaster. Probably the worst year of Kyle Lowry's career. So I do think it was time to move on from Miami, especially realizing that you have fallen short against Denver. You were so close to getting that ring, but Denver really held you on the offensive end, so you could use an offensive point guard. And clearly, the Hornets were doing a fire sale. Like, we'll get into the Hornets' perspective on this a little bit later, but the Hornets clearly want to maximize and get draft picks. And Terry Rozier has been playing the best year of his career, putting up 23 points and 7 assists for the Charlotte Hornets. Obviously, we expect those numbers to be down with the Miami Heat, as you've got Butler, Bam, and Hero already in the mix on the offensive end. But again, Terry Rozier will be another scoring threat, much better than Kyle Lowry, of course. So this is a very good move for Miami. And now they are the only team in the NBA who has 4 20-point per game scorers. As I said, Butler, Bam, Hero, and now Terry Rozier will be in the mix. But the question is, where does this put Miami actually in the mix for the Eastern Conference? In my opinion, I believe that you could make the case for them to be the second best team in the Eastern Conference currently at this state. I know they're on a 5-game losing streak. I know it's been a little bit rough. They are on the same pace as last year to make the play-in tournament. They're currently the 7th seed. Just watch them lose to the Boston Celtics in a disastrous fashion. They had a very bad loss to the Memphis Grizzlies on Wednesday night as well. But their schedule's not getting any easier. They've got the Knicks Saturday in the Garden. They've got Phoenix and Sacramento at home, so it's not really getting easier for Miami, but Miami really needs to get back on track as soon as possible. They probably need to win 2 out of those next 3 games there, but getting to the point, even though they are on this major losing streak, I still think they are the biggest threat to Boston, along with Milwaukee and Philadelphia. I would put Miami as a big threat to Boston because they know how to play Boston. They know how to beat Boston. Not necessarily saying they're better than Milwaukee and a Philadelphia, but if I had to choose a team, if I'm Boston and Miami and Milwaukee and Philadelphia are on the table, and I say, who would you not want to play out of those 3? If I'm Boston, I'm saying Miami in a heartbeat. You've got the scoring punch with Terry Rozier. Now they beat you last year. Now they added scoring. I know you've gotten better as well if you're Boston, but Terry Rozier I feel like could potentially solve a lot of Miami's issues on the offensive end, especially these last few games, not scoring 104 out of 5 of them. So this, to me, for Miami, does put them in that conversation of, are they going to make the conference finals again? Should they make the conference finals again? I mean, if I personally, as a Heat fan, as a biased Heat fan, I do expect it. For a neutral NBA fan, I would say a second round exit for Miami. But again, you wouldn't be surprised if they matched up with Boston, and you probably wouldn't be surprised if they beat Boston again and made it to the NBA Finals. It's just the Miami Heat. That's what they do in the playoffs. They have the team. They have the offensive weapons, but the one to make a run into the playoffs, we've seen it over and over again, and they've only gotten better. So you wouldn't be surprised if they did it again. The only concern I do have here is Tyler Hero. When I watch Tyler Hero play a little bit, especially on that defensive end, he is just really a bad liability on that defensive end. And teams are exposing him. I've watched pretty much every single Heat game this season. Teams are exposing Tyler Hero on the defensive end. And if you're Miami, especially in the playoffs, when it gets a little bit tighter, the defense gets a little bit better, the offense, the scoring production by the Stars gets a little bit better, teams are going to look to expose Tyler Hero. So Tyler Hero needs to improve on defense fast. And one thing else critiquing Tyler Hero, I believe he needs to have better decision making, because Terry Rozier, to me, is not a primary ball handler. He is a shooting guard that should be set up to shoot jump shots, set up to attack the basket. Tyler Hero needs to step into that role of being the point guard. And if he wants to be that point guard, which he needs to be for Miami to win an NBA championship, he needs to be more efficient, bringing the ball up, getting less turnovers, making smarter decisions there. So I do believe that if you're Tyler Hero, you definitely need to work on that. But again, Miami's there. Miami's in the picture. Miami's always there. It doesn't matter if they finish first. Doesn't matter if they finished last. Miami is still and will always be in the East picture. They will be one of the biggest threats in the Eastern Conference. And this trade only makes them better. But now let's look at the Hornets' perspectives of this. The Hornets looking like, especially trading Terry Rozier in his best season, as I mentioned, getting a first-round pick, a guaranteed first-round pick. It looks like that the Hornets are moving toward a fire sale. Obviously, now Michael Jordan has sold the team. There is new ownership coming in, so there's potentially, obviously, right when you see new ownership, there's immediate changes. You saw it with Matt Ishbia last year. They made that major change from that Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Devin Booker core to just trading Mikal and Cam to get Kevin Durant. Like, when owners come in, they want to see changes. They want to see changes the way they like it. So I'm not surprised that Charlotte is taking an initiative in making a change to their team. It makes sense. I like the trade for Charlotte's perspective, maximizing their value for Terry Rozier, someone who is having a career year, and we do expect more trades for the Charlotte Hornets team, who is mightily struggling this year. Obviously, bottom of the Eastern Conference, not obviously a Detroit or a Washington, but close, very, very close with 10 wins. Washington with 7. In Detroit, they did get a win against the Charlotte Hornets the other night. So now they are at 5 wins here in the Eastern Conference. So, I mean, yeah, those Detroit Pistons, they just make me absolutely laugh. Still on pace to be the worst team of all time, winning percentage-wise, by the way. But back to the Charlotte conversation, they do want a fire sale here. And if I'm Charlotte, I would absolutely maximize that. Trading your players now that necessarily don't need to be there. And finally, Charlotte getting into this full rebuild, looking at what other teams have done, such as the Utah Jazzes of the world, Oklahoma City Thunders, maximizing players' values, trading them to get first round picks, and then with all that free cap space, getting bad contracts, adding them to the roster, but taking on more first round picks to add those bad contracts to the roster while still having enough cap space to sign more young players. But honestly, if you're Charlotte, your focus here is to build around LaMelo Ball, to build around your second overall pick and Brandon Miller here. Because Brandon Miller, I didn't really like him as a second overall pick, but in the last few games, he has really proved a lot to me that he could be a potential star, an all-star in the NBA. So my focus, if I'm Charlotte, everybody's on the table. You got Gordon Hayward should be on the table. Miles Bridges, especially Miles Bridges, should be on the table because we know he accepted the qualified offer and he's most likely not coming back. He should definitely be on the table. PJ Washington has had a great year. He should also be on the table as well. There is a lot of things here. There's a lot of players, especially like those, that should be on the table for the Charlotte Hornets here. And I mean, you have to do it because this quote unquote rebuild that you're doing now, it's not working because you haven't made the playoffs since 2016. Charlotte has basically been irrelevant since 2016. I don't even know how that's possible, but they have. Their last playoff game was that Game 7 against Miami in 2016 when you still had Lou Alding, Joe Johnson, Dwayne Wade. You still had Dragic in his prime. You had Amari Stoudemire still playing the game of basketball. Like, it was the essence of it's just been a very long time for Charlotte not missing the playoffs consistently. So obviously this rebuild's not working. You have to do something else. And what I would do, look at other teams, see what they're doing. Because clearly for those teams, especially Oklahoma City, who now has, not to mention it, taken over the first seed in the Western Conference. Now Minnesota had control of that for most of the season, but now OKC has jumped in front of that number 1 seed in the Western Conference. So, not to mention that. So clearly something's working well in Oklahoma City, and they have plenty of picks to spare. So it's going to be a slow process for Charlotte, but just stack up as many first round picks as possible. Keep drafting younger players that you can develop and see where you go from there, because that's the only thing you can do here for Charlotte. Like, you can't, what I would do, just get worse, because there's no getting better. You're not making the playoffs, so just get worse. Pretty much the season's over. We knew that already, but there's no need to hold on to players, especially ones that, like a Miles Bridges, that are just going to walk anyway. So if you're Charlotte, just blow it up. I think Mitch Kupchak in the front office, the general manager of Charlotte, should absolutely do this fire sale immediately and as quick as possible. But another key aspect in this trade that we really haven't talked about yet is Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry obviously included in this deal for Terry Rozier going to Charlotte. Obviously, Charlotte, as we've said, is not playing their best basketball, not a very winning situation, not really a good fit for Kyle Lowry, especially LaMelo Ball there starting. You've now got Nick Richards probably going to get a bigger role on the Charlotte Hornets team. This is not really a team that Kyle Lowry needs to be on. He's not an expiring contract. You don't really need him there in Charlotte. So most likely what's next for Kyle Lowry is that he will be traded or bought out by the Charlotte Hornets. Most likely, again, as we said, Kyle Lowry's impact, 8 points per game for this year for the Miami Heat. He has had a career worst season, in my opinion. But, he can definitely help a contending team, especially off the bench. He will be a solid backup point guard for a contending team. Like, Miami was starting him, which was the problem. He's not a starting point guard anymore. He he is up there in age. He's 37. He just can't play 30 minutes, 35 minutes anymore. He can be a solid 20 to 25-minute point guard off the bench. If you need him to play 30 to 35 minutes one game, absolutely he can. He can start one game if your starting point guard's out still. He still has proven that he can put up numbers in some games. He can have some good games still. But honestly, for Kyle Lowry in this stage of his career, I don't really see him as a starter in the league anymore. He's just really lost a pep in his step, and there's just really not the explosiveness, that quick pace, fast decision-making point guard Kyle Lowry that we saw in Toronto. But obviously, the two options for Charlotte is to trade him or to buy him out. There really isn't any trades here for Charlotte that you can really get for Kyle Lowry, because obviously that $33 million contract, even though it is an expiring contract, and it will be intriguing to some organizations who want to free up cap space, there's just not really any teams out there that can match the money for Charlotte. And why would Charlotte want in the first place to get a multi-year contract that's close to Kyle Lowry's money, that's only keeping money in the books for Charlotte when they can have all this free cap space in the books to sign free agents? I mean, not a lot of free agents want to go to Charlotte anyway, but you're still going to have that cap space to sign those one or two free agents that decide, hey, I want to play in Charlotte and be on a losing organization. So I mean, there's just not really any trade scenarios. The only trade scenario that there is one that I could see, which I think would be actually perfect sense for both sides here. This is the only trade I could see for Kyle Lowry. This is involving the New York Knicks here. Kyle Lowry would go to the New York Knicks, a 1 or 2 second-round picks from the Charlotte Hornets, and the Charlotte Hornets would be getting Quentin Grimes here. Obviously, young player, but that doesn't match the money, so they would also be getting Evan Fournier. Evan Fournier, who is absolutely despised by Tom Thibodeau, had some pretty good years in Orlando, had a decent year in Boston, but ever since he signed with the Knicks, Tom Thibodeau was absolutely never gotten him to touch the floor. I don't think I've seen him play in an NBA basketball game in 2 years. So he would be traded in there to match the money, to make the money work, and he's really the only one, because he's also on an expiring, that I could see being swapped for Kyle Lowry for the Knicks. Obviously, Quentin Grimes not really working out here for the New York Knicks. They've got a similar player in Josh Hart. They've already got Dante DiVincenzo starting, so there's really not a lot of shooting guard spots left for Quentin Grimes. And then Miles McBride is having a resurgence here for the New York Knicks, really proving that he is a backup point guard in the NBA after trading Emmanuel Quickly to the Toronto Raptors. So if you really look at it in the big picture, there's really not a lot of room left for Quentin Grimes here in the New York Knicks rotation. So I think that would be a decent trade for Charlotte, getting Quentin Grimes, giving him the opportunity to start alongside LaMelo Ball. Not unlike Terry Rozier, who both LaMelo and Terry have offensive-centered games, Quentin Grimes can provide that defense in the front court that Charlotte can provide. And who knows, maybe Quentin Grimes can turn into an all-NBA defender, maybe like 13-point per game scorer, all-NBA defender. Like, you never know. So if I'm the Hornets, maybe I do that trade. I think the Knicks, it would suit them well. Even though Miles McBride has obviously resurged into a backup point guard, Kyle Lowry would definitely help with that backcourt depth, especially if Miles McBride has a rough stretch, or maybe you can play them both, or maybe you can play both of them off the bench for 15 minutes each. Who knows what Thibodeau would do with Kyle Lowry if they had Kyle Lowry and McBride. But I do think that would be the only trade that could potentially work for Kyle Lowry. And then so most likely he's getting put out in the buyout market. Teams that I could see him in the buyout market, as I just mentioned, the New York Knicks could get him in the buyout market. I could also see the Philadelphia 76ers. He is from Philadelphia, so look out for Philadelphia for a potential option for a backup point guard slot there. Patrick Beverley, I wouldn't say Philadelphia's a likely destination for Kyle Lowry. They've already got Patrick Beverley unless they want to decide to move on from him. I don't really see Kyle Lowry going there, but I think it's one of the only contending teams that could get Kyle Lowry, which we will explain in a couple of seconds here. Then the next team you could see Kyle Lowry going to, I would say the Los Angeles Lakers. I I mean, you've seen the issues. You've got really no backup point guard. You've got D'Angelo Russell, who's really not playing any good. You've got Gabe Vincent, who hasn't really played for the Los Angeles Lakers, also from the Miami Heat. So I think you just really need another guard out there who can help the Los Angeles Lakers distribute the ball, set up the offense, run the Lakers offense, which is a slow-paced offense, which currently would suit well with Kyle Lowry's game. So I think Kyle Lowry would work well with the Lakers. I would think he would fix some of their turnover issues, help a little bit, bring some more leadership to that young Lakers squad. Even though we say it's young, most of the squad obviously is young, not LeBron, but most of that Lakers squad is young, so he would bring some veteran presence there. Why are those three the only destinations that Kyle Lowry can go to? Well, there is a new rule in the NBA that second apron teams, which are the Los Angeles Clippers, the Phoenix Suns, Boston Celtics, Milwaukee Bucks, Denver Nuggets, they can't get Lowry because they do not have a mid-level exception. And if Lowry goes in the buyout market, Lowry will want that mid-level exception, which is a $7.8 million base salary for between like a $5 million, $7.8 million base salary for the remainder of that season. So those second apron teams cannot use that mid-level exception. So it's not possible for them to sign Kyle Lowry unless he says, hey, I can sign on a minimum contract. And then finally, a quick thing, another intriguing thing to watch out in the buyout market for Kyle Lowry is if he signs with the Toronto Raptors. I know that's crazy. I know that sounds a little bit out of sorts, especially since Toronto is a rebuilding team. But as I've said, Kyle Lowry's old. He's getting up there. Could he potentially retire after this season? Maybe. So maybe for his last half season, maybe his last 30 games, he wants to play with Toronto as the backup point guard. Maybe Toronto moves on from Dennis Schroeder, gets some value for him, brings in Kyle Lowry for the rest of the season, and plays him as the backup point guard. One final dance, last couple of games here with Toronto before he finally calls it a career in the NBA. So watch out for that potentially too for Kyle Lowry, because remember, he is 37. He is getting up there in age. Moving on, though, from the whole trade, I mean, it was a good trade for Miami, good trade for Charlotte. I think it was a win-win trade. I'm not really going to go over the winners and specific winners and losers of this trade because we have a lot to get into for the rest of the show today. But I really do think it was a win-win for both teams, for the reasoning that Miami needs scoring and that the Hornets can maximize their value and get as many first-round picks as possible. But moving on, the Wizards, in a developing story that happened Thursday, have moved on from Wes Unseld Jr. as the head coach and have moved him to a front office position. And now the Wizards have announced Brian Keefe will be the interim head coach for the rest of the season, and Washington will search for a new head coach in the offseason. Wes Unseld Jr. was 7-36 this season, the second worst record in the Eastern Conference. I think the second worst record in the NBA, if I'm not mistaken. Unseld Jr. had a 77-130 record in his 2.5 years as the Washington Wizards head coach. So not really anything special there. The Wizards now, obviously this season, have moved to a full rebuild, trading Bradley Beal to the Phoenix Suns and trading Kristaps Porzingis to the Boston Celtics. Well, this Wizards team, I mean, with Bradley Beal, without Bradley Beal, they've been an absolute disaster. Jordan Poole is just not going to do it for a franchise player. Kyle Kuzma is not going to do it for a franchise player. If I'm the Wizards, just trade Kyle Kuzma at this point. This is just getting to the point where you should just maximize Kuzma's value, get something out of him, because Kuzma is not going to want to play with this Wizards team long term. I mean, I would say trade Jordan Poole as well if you're Washington, but nobody wants Jordan Poole. I wouldn't trade for Jordan Poole if I'm a team. I think he's not a little bit, but a lot overrated. There's just really nothing for the Wizards to trade here except for Kyle Kuzma. Tyus Jones, you could potentially get a first-round pick for. That's the one player that I would trade this offseason for the Washington Wizards. But, in this trade deadline for the Washington Wizards, to get a potential first round pick, you might not even get a first round pick for Tyus Jones. But, there's not really a lot Washington can do. They're stuck in this situation here. They've got first round picks, but they're merely pick swaps with Phoenix. Not really any unprotected first round picks from other teams. They're just really pick swaps here. So, second round picks, they didn't really get any first round picks. So Washington's just really in this icky situation here. Not a lot of assets for the future, not a lot of assets to trade to get more assets for the future. So Washington's just really in this crappy situation. There's just really not a, and even if you do look at the roster, other than Kyle Kuzma, other than Jordan Poole, there's just not really a lot of promising players on the roster. Coulibaly, not really that good for a 7th pick. Obviously, it's only his first year, but not, especially with the playing time he's getting. I expected a little bit more. Avdia, he's been injured most of his career, has had a decent season, but most of his career has been injured. Kispert, he's going to get you 8 to 10 points a game. Daniel Gafford, he's okay, but there's just really nothing promising here. Nothing here for the Wizards that you can really look forward to for the future. So, if you're Washington, this is just a really terrible situation. So, I would try to get every asset as I possibly can here. And there's nothing really else you can do. This Washington team is going to be very, very bad for a very, very long time. And I would be shocked if they made the playoffs in the next 3 seasons. But moving on, because we are crunching down on time here, let's talk a little bit about the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cleveland Cavaliers have been one of the hottest teams in the NBA, the hottest team until Wednesday night. They were on an 8-game winning streak before losing to the Milwaukee Bucks and interim head coach in his first game, Joe Punti, in a blowout fashion. Currently, the Cavaliers on this 8-game winning streak before, obviously, that loss to the Bucks. We're doing this without Darius Garland, who's been out for 17 games, and without Evan Mobley, who has been out for 21 straight games. Currently, Cleveland is at a 26-16 record. They are 5th in the East. When they were all the way back to 8th in the East, they were behind the Orlando Magic. They were way back there in the Eastern Conference. And now they've really propelled themselves to that conversation of getting back to that 4 to 5 seed, potentially if Philadelphia falls off, that 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. But obviously the question is, that we're going to ask here is, who do they have enough? No, they don't have enough. That it's just a straight up answer. First of all, I never thought the Cavs had a chance against the Knicks in the first round. I personally picked the New York Knicks because Mobley, Garland, not really any experience in the playoffs. Jared Allen hasn't really had any major experience in the playoffs. That team was just young and inexperienced. Obviously, this year, if they do match up with the Knicks again, that 4-5, you expect them to come back strong and not losing 5 games, especially having home court advantage in the playoffs. But you really never know what's going to happen for the Cleveland Cavaliers here. And then the question to me for this roster is, you've seen this winning streak for Cleveland. Is the Garland-Mitchell backcourt really working? And is the Mobley-Allen frontcourt really working? Because they've had these 2 guards, 2 forwards who've had similar games to each other. They basically mirror each other. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell is better than Darius Garland. Mobley and Allen, you could have an argument for. You could probably say Mobley has the edge, but pretty much essentially the same players. At the end of the day, they just really play the same. So I don't think really it's a good combination for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I don't think Cleveland will go anywhere with this roster anytime soon, especially since the Eastern Conference has gotten better, even better this year from last year. You've got Boston, they got better. You've got Milwaukee. They haven't really gotten better per se this season so far, but you never know with Doc Rivers coming in and a whole new world for Milwaukee there. Philadelphia, even though they traded Harden, Maxey has taken a step better and they've gotten better. New York has looked as good as it was last year. Miami just got better with Terry Rozier. The Pacers have gotten better with the Pascal Siakam trade. Magic have gotten better with their young players' development. So pretty much every team in the top 8 now have gotten essentially better in the Eastern Conference. So for Cleveland, I just don't really see them going anywhere, whether that's a 3 seed against like a 6 seed in the Pacers or the Heat, a 4 seed against or 5 seed against the New York Knicks. I'm just not really high on this Cleveland Cavaliers team personally, and they would need one significant player. And I believe they have no shot at getting a significant player unless they were to trade Darius Garland or Evan Mobley / Jared Allen. So I don't really think Cleveland's going anywhere anytime soon in this Eastern Conference. And you should expect not at the end of next season when Donovan Mitchell's contract runs out, he will leave the Cleveland Cavaliers, and this Cavaliers team will not be the same, and they will be going through rough times. So this is just really a tough situation here for Cleveland. Your players really play similar games, and it doesn't really work out, and the East is just way better than you. So, I mean, nothing you can do for Cleveland. I mean, probably just first round exits for the next 2 years. I mean, that's all you can really expect from this Cleveland team here. So, I really don't think they have enough to contend in the East, even though they do look like a good regular season team. Just don't really see it in postseason play. Next, I've got for you something that happened that really makes me a little bit emotional. A Philadelphia 76ers player did this the other night. Joel Embiid scored 70 points, 18 years to the day that Kobe had 81 points in 2006. He did it on Monday, January the 22nd, same day as Kobe Bryant in 2006, scoring 81 points against the Toronto Raptors at home. That was a very famous game there, and Embiid does it on the same day as Kobe Bryant. Also, I wanted to add the Timberwolves in the podcast today, but as I mentioned earlier, didn't really have a lot of time to put everything in the podcast today. Karl-Anthony Towns also scored 62 on this night. They did lose, which is a little bit to the Hornets, which is a little bit concerning. We were going to talk about that a little bit, but we couldn't fit that into the show. Maybe we'll talk about that next week if there's not a lot of news, but obviously you expect it because of the trade deadline. So shout out to Karl-Anthony Towns. Even though they did lose, he did have 62 points, but Embiid, my goodness, and a 133 to 123 win against the Spurs. When Popovich said, we are going to dominate Embiid, like being sarcastic, but at the same point, it's just funny that he said it because obviously Embiid scored a franchise record for the Philadelphia 76ers, passing Will Chamberlain, who had 68 for the 76ers. Don't get that confused. If you're questioning it, he scored 100 points with the Philadelphia Warriors, who are currently the Golden State Warriors. He played for both the Golden State Warriors of current, which were the Philadelphia Warriors, and the Philadelphia 76ers of current as well. So don't get those stats a little bit confused saying, oh, you've got that stat wrong. No, it is actually correct here because those 100 points were with the Warriors here. And I mean, Joel, all you can say about him is absolutely playing like an MVP here. But the problem is, if you're Embiid, the only way I can judge you is through postseason play. And as we mentioned with Doc Rivers earlier in the show today, second round exits, I mean, it's not really going to get it done. Most of your career, you've been a first or second round exit. Every single year, it's been a frustrating loss, whether it against Atlanta in 7 games, Miami in 6, Boston in 7 this last year. Been absolutely rough. And I mean, I can't really say you're a great player because the question I really was going to ponder here is if he should be in that debate as the greatest Sixer with Allen Iverson. Yes, he could be in that debate, but I'm going to say Allen Iverson is better until Joel Embiid shows me some playoff success because I don't really think a player should be considered as one of the greats, a Hall of Famer, unless they can at least have some playoff success, at least on some team, whether that's being the first option or the second option. I mean, we judged it with Jokic last year. We were like, Jokic is great, MVPs, but never had success in the playoffs. And now we're saying he is an all-time great because he got it done. And Embiid will be in that same category if he can get it done and win a championship. But that hasn't happened yet. We judged LeBron for years until he won in 2012, that he couldn't get it done in the playoffs, that he wasn't ready for that. We judged KD, he couldn't get it done in the playoffs. Obviously, we still judge him because he joined the Dynasty Warriors team, and he hasn't won a championship as the number one option, and he puts himself in the GOAT conversation. But we judged KD about it. We judged Giannis about it too as well. Like, we're judging these great big men in the NBA today. We've judged them because they didn't win titles, but then when they win titles, we consider them all-time greats. So basically, how I'm determining Embiid's status as an all-time great, as the best player in franchise history of the Philadelphia 76ers, is his playoff success. If he gets to the finals, maybe we have a debate there. If he wins the championship, I think he obviously greatest player over AI easily. So I really don't have an opinion on Embiid as for his legacy because I just haven't really seen it in the playoffs yet. I need to see it in the playoffs if I really want to consider him as an all-time great player. It's tough to say because Embiid, he's playing amazing. I mean, he should be MVP again this season, back-to-back MVPs. Potentially Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the mix there. Obviously, you got Jokic. But I do think Embiid, the way he's been playing, especially this last 20 game ever since he came back from that knee injury, he's absolutely been balling out. So I believe he is the best player in the regular season, but legacy is defined by the playoffs, and I can't really judge a legacy here unless he has success in the playoffs. But moving on, the All-Star starters were announced for the NBA. There is a little bit of controversy all over the place here. And I mean, if you just look at it, we'll start with the Eastern Conference starters. Tyrese Halliburton of the Indiana Pacers, Damian Lillard of the Milwaukee Bucks, Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics, Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks, and Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers. The West starters, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder, Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks, LeBron James of the Los Angeles Lakers, Kevin Durant of the Phoenix Suns, and the big man, Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets. I mean, it looks okay. But when you really analyze it, see the players that are not starting, there's a few snubs that I would like to mention. First of all, let's start with the Western Conference guards. You've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic, but obviously you've got two amazing players who are not starting in this All-Star game for the Western Conference. One named Wardell Stephen Curry, the greatest shooter that God has ever created, who has been an All-Star starter since 2014. This is the first time in 10 years that Stephen Curry has not been an All-Star starter, which is absolutely crazy to say. It's not an end of an era because Curry's still playing the way he's playing. I mean, he's been absolutely balling out, but the problem is they're not having team success while SGA is first place in the Western Conference and Luka has resurged the Mavericks back into the playoff push. So, I mean, you could make the case that Steph Curry should be above Luka Doncic, but at the end of the day, I mean, there's really nothing you can do there. I mean, the West is just absolutely great. I mean, if I had to choose, I'm not really a super Luka fan. So, at the end of the day, I believe Steph Curry this current season even though Luka's Luka, I still think Steph Curry is a overall better player and should deserve to be the starter. But based off records and team success here, they're going to give the edge to Luka Doncic, which I don't have any complaints for. Another player who's off the bench, who you notice is the best player on a top team in the Western Conference in the Minnesota Timberwolves, Anthony Edwards, coming off the bench. He might not even be the first guard off the bench. He might be the second guard off the bench behind Stephen Curry, which is absolutely crazy to think about here, considering how good the Minnesota Timberwolves have been this year. It's absolute madness that Anthony Edwards is not starting. But, I mean, the West is absolutely stacked. I mean, you can't do anything. I mean, if you had to pick a replacement, I mean, you could swap him out with Luka Doncic. But, again, Luka Doncic has played absolutely incredible. I'm not swapping him out of SGA. SGA should be there 100%. There is no controversy there. He is an MVP candidate. And it currently is my second player in the MVP race behind, as I just said, Joel Embiid. So there's no debate there. I think you could make the debate for Edwards and Curry over Luka Doncic. It's tough because the Western Conference guards are absolutely balling out and being incredible and being great this season. Next, let's talk about the West forwards. You've got LeBron, KD, and Jokic. Jokic, absolutely fine. No problems there. But you could make the case for Kawhi Leonard, whether that's starting over Kevin Durant and LeBron James. I mean, LeBron James has had some bias, obviously, second best player, in my opinion, of all time. He's their best player of all time. He's been a starter for every single All-Star game for pretty much his whole life. I mean, even now, but the question, does he really deserve to be an All-Star starter, especially with the Lakers struggling. I know he's been playing great, but at the same point, the Los Angeles Lakers are struggling. So could you consider giving it to Kawhi Leonard, who's been his healthiest in years, and the Clippers are in a much better situation in the NBA standings than the Los Angeles Lakers? You could make the argument for that. And honestly, I would agree. I think Kawhi Leonard should be starting over LeBron. You could keep KD in there because the Suns have been improving as of late. You could have said KD, especially beginning of the year when the Suns had a little bit of a rough start. But now that the Suns are back on track to where they need to be, I think LeBron, I think I would probably put Kawhi in there for LeBron. Now moving on to the East guards. This is the most controversial thing that I've absolutely ever seen in my life. Damian Lillard is starting. Yes, the team that has the worst defense in the NBA. A team that I mean is doing great, but when you look at the other guards in the NBA, the New York Knicks guard Jalen Brunson absolutely been balling out, carrying this New York Knicks team. But the player who I believe should be starting over Damian Lillard is Donovan Mitchell. I understand it's the Cavs. I mean, what's so special about the Cavs? I mentioned Darius Garland out 17 games, Evan Mobley out 21 games. Cavs are back right into this race. The Cavs are back into that race to the fourth seed, potentially third seed in the Eastern Conference. Donovan Mitchell has absolutely been carrying this team, putting up 27 points per game this season and over 30 points per game in the stretch that Garland has been out this season. So if you're looking at it for Damon, if you had to pick Dame or Donovan, I would personally pick Donovan. I think Donovan's had the better season. I think Dame has taken a little bit of a step down with Adrian Griffin. Could see more of a production with him with Doc Rivers. Who knows? But at this current state, I believe Donovan Mitchell should be a starter. You could consider Jalen Brunson there too. I wouldn't be mad at that either. Jalen Brunson has absolutely been balling out so far for the New York Knicks. So I wouldn't be mad if you said Jalen Brunson there, but Damian Lillard should not be on there. It should either be Mitchell or Brunson. Personally, for me, I'm going to say Donovan Mitchell, but you could make the case for Jalen Brunson as well. East forwards, you've got Tatum, Giannis, and Embiid, no problems there. There's really no other forwards that you could put. Those are the three best forwards in the Eastern Conference, and they respectively in the regular season, and they respectively deserve to be starting in the All-Star game. Finally, we get to it, the Take Your Shot Top 5. This is NBA Rivalry Week, so we have 5 amazing rivalries for you here on the Take Your Shot Top 5. They're all rivalries, all classics. Starting with number 5, we've got the Dallas Mavericks going to Atlanta, which is tomorrow night. You've got Luka Doncic versus Trae Young. Obviously, that what if the trade that traded Trae Young and Trae Young and Cam Reddish to the Atlanta Hawks for Luka Doncic. You never know what if the Atlanta Hawks had Luka Doncic instead of Trae Young and they made that run in the playoffs in 2021 and they forced the Bucks to 6 with Trae Young. What could they have done with Luka Doncic? That's a big what if there. I don't think the Hawks would be in a situation they are in right now with Luka Doncic. There's always a big what if here. What if the Mavericks got Trae Young? Where would Kyrie Irving be right now? Because for sure he wouldn't be in Dallas right now. There's just a lot of scenarios with that trade. It's an intriguing rivalry. They're two of the youngest rising stars in the NBA. We love to see that rivalry. But in this game, I'm going to go with the Dallas Mavericks because the Hawks have been mightily struggling. And Dallas is just a significantly better team. They have a great offense, but Atlanta has a weak defense, and I expect Dallas to outscore them. And Dallas, even though their defense is not as good as I hope it would have been this season, I think the defense will ultimately not contain Atlanta's offense, but hold them to where it needs to be, considering how good their offense is. Number 4, I'm going to put them on the list once again, even though they are struggling. This is a classic second round rematch from last year. Miami Heat going to Madison Square Garden and playing the New York Knicks. We love it. We love to see Jalen Brunson versus Butler. We love to see Bam versus Randall. We like the new trades. We've got OG Anunoby in New York. We've got Terry Rozier in Miami. They're making changes to compete in the Eastern Conference. We love to see it. But in this one, in Madison Square Garden, especially with Miami losing a lot, I'm very intrigued to pick the Miami Heat because they have been losing, and it's got to stop eventually. I just don't really see a Miami Heat team, especially of this quality, losing a lot of games. But I am going to go with the Knicks in this one because the Knicks have looked really, really elite ever since they've gotten OG Anunoby, winning 10 out of their last 12 games here. So I'm going to go with the Knicks. I really wouldn't be surprised if the Heat stole this one, but the Knicks look like a better team, which is why I'm going to go with them here in this game. Number 3, I've got the Philadelphia 76ers versus the Denver Nuggets, a rematch from what we saw in Philadelphia when we saw Embiid versus Jokic. It was an absolute classic, and we're going to see another absolute classic here again, this time part 2 in Denver. Obviously, Philadelphia got the win against the Denver Nuggets at home in that first matchup, but this time I think Denver will, at home, will get the better of Philadelphia. And I just don't see Denver losing to Philadelphia twice. And I know Jokic and Embiid really care about championships more, but I know there's that rivalry there. I know there's that rivalry of who is the better center, who is the better player. So they're both intrigued to get the win, and I don't think Jokic is going to lose to Embiid twice. So I'm going to take the Denver Nuggets here. Number 2, we've got another second round rematch. We've got the Los Angeles Lakers going to the Golden State Warriors. Both teams have been struggling a little bit, but we love to see it. It's LeBron versus Steph Curry. It's what we saw in the NBA for years in 2015 all the way to 2018, 2000, even last year. We've just seen it ever since 2015. It's been an absolutely incredible rivalry, incredible battles, and these teams are struggling. So we've got to see a team that both these teams really need that game. Both teams are struggling mightily, but the team that I think is going to want it more is the Golden State Warriors. And I'm going to take the Golden State Warriors. They are at home in this one. I think they are in a better position here. And I think Golden State will finally start to get on a little bit of a winning streak here. So I'm going to take the Golden State Warriors in this one. Final one, we've got the number 1 Milwaukee Bucks going to Denver. Yes, I have Denver twice on here, but not for Denver. It is Denver, Milwaukee, 2 of the best teams in the league, but mostly for Milwaukee here. Could potentially be one of Doc Rivers' first games, and it will be a huge test going to Denver. We are going to see what Doc Rivers is made of immediately going to play a highly elite team, the former defending NBA champions in the Denver Nuggets. Let's see what he does against Jokic. Let's see that defense against Nikola Jokic. Let's see that defense against Jamal Murray. Let's see that defense against Aaron Gordon, KCP, and them boys, and MPJ. Don't forget about him in the Mile High City. Let's see what they can do immediately with Doc Rivers at the helm. So that's going to be a test not only for Doc Rivers, but for that entire Milwaukee Bucks team. And you know what? I think Milwaukee will do it. I think Milwaukee will upset the Denver Nuggets in that one. And that is my Take Your Shot top 5. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time here. We've talked a lot today about what's happened in the NBA, and it's been absolutely incredible to talk. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching the show. And remember, please follow on Spotify, Take Your Shot, and on Instagram at take_your_shot_podcast_. That's at take_your_shot_podcast_. And tell me how you would have taken your shots on these takes. That's all my shots for the week. See you next week, folks.